Are you always tired? Well, maybe you should try new. Energy Proof gives you 2 full hours of energy. See store for details. Restrictions apply.
Hello, my name is Veronica, and today I'll be your host with the History Talk Show. I have Timmy and Caleb with me. The first question is, what was the first battle in the Civil War? Explain.
So the first battle of the Civil War was the firing upon Fort Sumter. And what happened was the Confederates, they were trying to take over all the northern forts. But Fort Sumter was harder because the Union didn't want to give up Fort Sumter. And so what the Confederates tried to do was they used a blockade to try and stop provisions to get to Fort Sumter.
Okay, and then after the blockade happened, the Union was trying to get supplies past the blockade, but eventually the people in the fort were starting to starve, and the Confederate gunfire was just too much, so the Fort Sumter was surrendered.
The next question is, what was the Battle of Antietam, also known as Sharpsburg? Who won?
Okay, the Battle of Sharpsburg was one of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War. More men died on that day than on any other day in the Civil War. And there was a sunken road where the Confederates were just they were in a defensive position trying to hold off the Union. But the Union troops just kept coming, and although many of the Confederates and many of the Union soldiers kept being shot down by the gunfire, the Unions just pretty much kept coming until they took over the sunken road and defeated the Confederates.
What was the Battle of Gettysburg, and who won?
So the Battle of Gettysburg is also known as basically the turning point of the Civil War because it was a prolonged battle. So what happened is there's 3 days of fighting, and usually it was only 1 full day of fighting. And they call it the turning point of the war because so many of the Confederates were killed in the Battle of Gettysburg that they didn't really have an army anymore, and they just kind of broke apart the Confederates.
Yeah, and some of the main events at the Battle of Gettysburg was the Battle of So at Little Round Top, there was the Confederate soldiers were firing upon the Union soldiers, but the Union soldiers ran out of ammunition. So their commander ordered them to fix their bayonets to their guns, and they charged down the hill and killed many of the Confederate soldiers who were so surprised by the charge that they fled. Also, their commander was Colonel Chamberlain, and also at a different time in the battle, there was an event known as Pickett's Charge, where the Confederates wanted to take a hill that the Union soldiers were encamped on. They were on another hill, and there was a valley between them. So the Union had lots of cannons and artillery guns up on their hill, but Robert E. Lee ordered many of the Confederate soldiers to charge at the Union Hill. But since there was so much heavy fire from the cannons and artillery that they were just cut down and were killed.
This was the first half of our History Talk Show. We'll be back after a short break.
Have you tried self-grilling hot dogs yet? If you haven't, what are you waiting for? What is a self-grilling hot dog, you ask? Well, imagine just a high-quality hot dog. And then you take all the water and grease out of that hot dog and you replace it with high-grade pure gasoline. And the best part is, are you cooking for a large group of people? If you light one self-grilling hot dog, it'll light all the other hot dogs in the pile. And they will all be cooked to delicious perfection.
Hello, welcome back to the History Talk Show. Our next question will be, what was the Battle of Vicksburg and who won?
So the Battle of Vicksburg was the last Confederate fort that was along the Mississippi River. And it was very fortified and had very large guns in the front of the city. and the Union cannot storm the city from the front because the big guns would completely decimate their armies. And so what the Union decided to do is take ships and then transport their soldiers across the Mississippi to the back of the city. And they had laid siege. They wouldn't let food get into the city. And so the people were like starving. They had to eat horses, and then they started eating rats even. And finally, the general of the Vicksburg decided to surrender. And actually, the general of Vicksburg, he was a good friend of General Ulysses Grant, who was the Union general who laid siege to Vicksburg.
What was the Battle of Fort Henry and who won?
So Fort Henry was one of the forts along the Mississippi that was above Vicksburg, and so it belonged to the Confederates. But this happened before the siege of Fredericksburg, and so the fort belonged to the Confederates, but the Union soldiers took the fort from them, and it was a really bad hit for the Confederates because it meant that they really didn't have many forts left along the Mississippi River, and if the Union could take all of the forts along the Mississippi, they could pretty much split the Confederacy in two by preventing the states in the West, such as Texas and Alabama and like the Oklahoma Territory, from sending supplies or troops to the eastern half, which included Virginia and the other major states.
What was the Battle of Fort Donelson and who won?
So the Fort Donelson was similar. The Battle of Fort Donelson was similar to the Battle of Fort Henry. That it was another fort along the Mississippi, and General Ulysses S. Grant was one of the battles in a series of victories for the Union troops along the Mississippi River forts. Okay.
That was the first episode of History Talk Show. Our topic was Civil War battles. Thank you for watching. Welcome back to the History Talk Show. The next question is, what was the Battle of Vicksburg? I messed up.
Have you tried like sausage yet? If you
Why are we doing this?